of previous years, we've had much great attention to Ukraine, and we've begged for attention, or places elsewhere, places which still need it, like Sudan and so forth. But today, we begged for attention for the people of Ukraine, and we will be having a launch here right after this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, USG Griffiths. High Commissioner Grandi.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I think the two key words that Martin used are the key ones. One is remember. Unfortunately, it's sad to say. I don't want to elaborate even more what he just said. And the second one is full-blown occupation, or well, it's war, full-blown occupation and destruction of infrastructure and terrible impact on millions of civilians. Most likely what we have seen in the last month, I would say, is one of the worst periods of the war in terms of impact on civilians, not least because it coincides with winter, which, as you all know, is a terrible time is very, very harsh in Ukraine. The total displacement today, I'll focus on that, is about 10 million people. If you add the almost 4 million estimated to be displaced inside Ukraine and the over 6 million estimated to be refugees worldwide, this includes Canada and US and Japan and other places, but 6.3 million, I think. So we're over 10 million people not in their homes, which remains, by the way, the largest displacement crisis in the world. I can't think of any other crisis that is as big. The priority, clearly, and Martin focused on that already, is to help people inside Ukraine. There's much less outflow of people. The big outflow was really in the initial 2 months of the war, if you recall. But then I think that what happened, people saw that it was possible to remain safe and remain inside the country, which they prefer, to be closer to their homes. So we continue to see displacement inside Ukraine, but much less or almost not at all outside displacement. Of the people outside, especially those in Europe that are just over 5 million, so the bulk, some people do go back and forth. But the return has not been in very huge numbers. IOM estimates about 900,000 people have returned. This is an estimate because it's very, very difficult to count because of the pendular movement. Some of those people, by the way, are now displaced because they don't go back. They cannot go back to their homes, which is destroyed or on the front line, but they stay in other places. So it's a fluid situation. One thing that is important, because I know there's been some debate, including with the Ukrainian authorities, it is very important why the pendular movement is possible and it's not possible in other refugee situations, because these people are not fleeing from their government. They're fleeing from the occupation and the invasion and the bomb and the Russian bombing. They're not fleeing from the Ukrainian. They're still refugees. That's how we call them, because they flee from war, but not refugees from their government. I want to say that very clearly in case there is any misunderstanding in this respect. And a couple of words on what we are launching in addition to what Martin said. So the appeal has two components, inside Ukraine and outside. The outside is called Refugee Response Plan. It is lower in numbers than last year. We're asking for just over $1 billion, basically 1.1 billion. I recall that last year we asked for 1.7. Clearly, more people are included, more people work, there is less, needs are diminishing, and governments and the European Commission are doing a lot. So there is less need for us and our partners. But still, in all countries, especially Moldova, but also in other countries, there is a need to do work. You know, fulfill basic needs, protection needs for those that have particular requirements in terms of access to services or in terms of particular vulnerabilities. Of course, access to education and health, these are very important. Still, we're distributing, including the partners, are distributing cash in many countries. I have to say that Europe has been very exemplary, as you know, through the temporary protection regime that was established throughout Europe in the course of 2022. It's still in place. It's now in place until, I think, spring of 2025. We will have to think of that. They will have to think of that later. If, God forbid, this continues, we don't know. But for the time being, that regime is strong, still exemplary. Still, my message is, please learn from it, because it's a good model for other refugee groups as well, not just for Ukrainians, but for Ukrainians, it's very, very good. Still interesting, if you look at the statistics, the number of kids going to school, refugee kids going to school, is only about 50%. Many learn online, the Ukrainian curriculum and so forth. So it's not that half of the kids don't learn, but those who go to formal school, which is important for children, as you all know, is only half. Likewise, the number of refugees in working age who are employed, Ukrainians, depending on the country, ranges from 40 to 60%. So there's an extra push to be made in terms of inclusion. Many are always waiting to go back home. So there is that self-imposed temporariness, if you wish. But these are all areas that need attention in terms of a protracted situation where you want more inclusion, you want more education, because you don't want to leave anybody behind in a political environment that with the European election is likely to be volatile, although we haven't really seen, as in other contexts, a backlash on that particular situation. Finally, just to say that, so last year we asked for the refugee component, we asked for 1.7 billion. This year, 1.1 billion. This is normal. Last year it was well funded. Let's hope it will be this year as well. I remind all of you that we, UNHCR, are not well funded, generally speaking. So I hope that Ukraine, which has been an exception, will remain an exception. Well, I hope that the others will also be better funded, but you know what I mean. I hope that at least funding there will continue to be generous. It's very, very important, especially at the time of competition with so many other situations. Moldova, big focus. The appeal covers 11 countries, I should have said. And by the way, I want to also echo a point Martin made. This appeal, you spoke about 500 organizations. The refugee appeal is over 300 organizations as well, of which interesting 45, so about a sixth, are led by refugees themselves, so are really grassroots. So this localization that everybody's talking about in this context, which has opportunity inside Ukraine and outside, is really working, which I think is a big asset of the operation in terms of cost and effectiveness. And finally, just to say that, like I said, Moldova is a big priority still, although more stable from the refugee side than before. I am going there myself this week, and I'll be also going into Ukraine after Moldova for a few days. I was hoping to be able to go before and talk to you about that, but the logistics didn't allow, so I'll be there from next weekend till the middle of next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. And just for housekeeping, unfortunately, High Commissioner Grandi has to leave us at 9 o'clock sharp. So I would like to ask those who want to ask questions to High Commissioner Grandi maybe to start. So we can, and Martin. 5 minutes only. Okay, 5 minutes. So, okay, let's concentrate the questions to High Commissioner first. Can I ask you to raise your hands for questions to Mr. Grandi, to High Commissioner Grandi?
No.
Yeah. USG Griffiths will stay a little bit longer. Okay, so let me see if there's any specific question to High Commissioner Grandi, please. Online or in the room? Do I see any hand up? Apparently, yes. Antonio Broto, the Spanish news agency. Antonio, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Grandi, as you mentioned several times, Moldova, can you explain us what is the special needs of refugees in that country, and what are the main difficulties in this? And if you can mention also some of the other 11 countries that are in your plan. Thank you.
No, I understood. Yes, I heard. Yeah, I think that it's not that Moldova has more specific needs than the other countries. It's the same vulnerable groups, mental health, by the way, I should have mentioned, big problem growing everywhere. Clearly, the trauma of war, the trauma of separation from family is taking a toll after almost 2 years. So 2 years? Yeah, 2 years. So that is seen in Moldova as is seen elsewhere. The difference with Moldova is that Moldova is outside the European Union, so a little bit less supported by the union's system that across the board are supporting refugees in the other countries. Otherwise, the countries included are, as I said, are 11. The biggest ones, you know which ones they are. Poland continues to be the biggest refugee hosting country. Germany is the biggest refugee hosting countries. We are also operating in the Baltics and throughout Europe, I would say. But don't make mistakes. In most of these countries, our programs, the programs of our partners are relatively small because states are taking the lead, municipalities are taking the lead. Moldova, this is a bit less developed, less structured. So organizations, humanitarian organizations have a little bit more space, but it's going well. It was difficult at the beginning. I remember to set up systems, but already in my visit last year, I could see a lot of progress, excellent cooperation with the Moldovan government, and I trust I'll see the same later this week.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. Any other question? If not, I know you are expected outside from one of our journalists, so we will continue with other questions to Mr. Griffiths. I have seen quite a few hands. Yes, please. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, Michelle Angran for Geneva Solutions. Thank you, Alessandra. Mr. Griffiths, my question is about Ukraine and Switzerland hosted talks yesterday about the 10-point peace formula. I was wondering how involved is the UN with these efforts, which include a lot of the points in the plan are directly or indirectly related to humanitarian needs, and do you foresee any other related initiatives such as the Black Sea grain deal, which we saw, of course, fall apart? But do you see any other similar agreements that could be reached? Thank you.
Am I on? Yeah. I don't have any direct involvement in that peace plan process, but I think the UN does observe much of it. And of course, we get reports about the meetings, and we will, I'm sure, from the one yesterday. And I know my colleague, Denise Brown, the humanitarian coordinator and resident coordinator of the UN in Ukraine, does attend meetings in the presidency, I think still weekly, on the progress of that plan. And it's still in progress because we're about to enter the third year. And as Filippo said, which I thought was a really good point, it's been as bad as it could be this last month, hasn't it? And that's really been quite shocking. The number of attacks, the broad range across the whole of the country from Russia has been absolutely unrelenting. So we need progress on that plan. As a former mediator, there's nothing more important than a horizon, a future for peace, some sort of optimism. On the Black Sea, yes, we were very unhappy, of course, all of us, about the termination in July of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Rebecca Greenspan has been continuing her work on the memorandum of understanding signed between the UN and Russia on getting Russian exports out. That wasn't stopped. It's still going on. And we are still hoping to make progress on it. We met here in Geneva, Rebecca hosting a meeting. I was present with the Russian delegation a few weeks ago. So we're still talking. And there's still opportunity in our view for progress on the Black Sea. But what we need to remember about the Black Sea is this, that it is obviously coming through the Bosphorus, a choke point, the Bosphorus anyway, a trade route of the highest importance, not just for grain, but in particular in terms of food security for grain, but also for oil and for other commodities. And if the war were to, and we have seen signs that it has in some respects, to be extended to make the Black Sea really a war theatre, then of course those exports would be at risk. So far, a rare piece of relatively good news, the exports that are continuing by both Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine out of those Odessa ports, down through the solidarity lanes, down in the western edge of the Black Sea, have been working quite well. I have heard the figure of up to 7.5 million tons exported through the course of the last many months in this way. But it's precarious, it's tenuous, and I believe personally that we need to talk to both sides about how to make those exports safe. And of course, we are in constant contact with Turkey on this, who have their lead role in the Black Sea. So watch this space.
Thank you very much, Ms. G. Griffiths. Other questions in the room, or I'll go to the platform? Okay, so Gabrielle Tetreault, Reuters.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Griffiths. Given that the response plan is designed to cover people most in need, many of these people are in areas occupied by Russia or near the front lines. And OCHA has said that its access to these areas, to the occupied areas, has been significantly impeded. I'm just wondering how you plan to reach all these people in these areas, and whether the greatest impediment is the absence of security guarantees or the lack of political will from the occupying power. Thank you.
Yes, there are significant numbers. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but in areas under Russian control, on the Russian side of the line, where our convoys have not crossed virtually since the beginning of the war, there has been aid provided to the people living there. They certainly need it, obviously, just like any other part of the country, through local organizations, some of them supported by organizations in Ukraine proper. Excuse me, but not enough. And we continue to remain in negotiation with the Russian government about how to make access to those people more, how to get access to those people, not even more effective, how to get access to those people who are perhaps in the most urgent of needs, since it has now been 2 years since any real, effective, regular, reliable humanitarian aid has reached them. The lower Donbass, effectively, and elsewhere. And in the front lines, this is the daily life, really, of humanitarian operations inside Ukraine. Yes, to the displaced who are further back in places of safety. Yes, to repair and reconstruct shelters in those places because of the winter and because people coming back and also people fleeing from the front lines need somewhere to live. Yes, to repair places which are damaged by these attacks, all those things. But people in the front lines, for example, by the river in Kherson and so forth, people who have lived through this hell for 2 years, these people are reached by these convoys. And on every occasion, we provide notification to both sides when a convoy is going to take place, to what area, with what purpose, with what kind of supplies, and so forth. So we're completely open and transparent about that, for the purposes of safety and security. We do this elsewhere. We do this in Gaza. We do this in Syria. We do this around the world. It's essentially a deconfliction system. So to make sure that the places we go to are not attacked. And on the whole, those convoys have got through safely in the course of this last year, and that is a great relief for those people living there. But Humanitarian aid needs to be repetitive, reliable, predictable. You need to know when the next one is coming in order to space out the supplies that you have acquired on this occasion. This is so everywhere. This is so in Gaza, this is so everywhere. And that, I think, is what is most important for the people on the front lines, to be sure that they know that next week or in a month's time or whatever the regularity is planned to be, that it is something that it can be relied on. And under the leadership of Denise and with these 500 partners and with the funding, which has been very, 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 very generous in these last couple of years, that has mostly been achieved. That's a small mercy, but it is a mercy for the people involved in war. Last year, in 2023, we had a budget of $3.9 billion, more than this year. We're constantly trying to reduce the numbers that we're asking for because the economy, the global economy, tells us to. And we received 67% funding last year. So we received $2.65 billion last year. 67% funding was probably almost certainly the best level of funding in the world last year. Very, very many of I think our total amount of funding for the whole year for the global humanitarian response plans, which required 58 billion, I think it was by the end of the year, received around 30. This year, we've launched a plan for the year for humanitarian response plans totaling $48 billion, again, trying to keep the numbers down so that we can make sure we get as much as we can to prioritize people. And we would hope to improve on the percentage. But Ukraine has been relatively well funded. But as people have said who have visited, and Filippo will remind us when he's there, not fully funded. Not fully funded. And the needs continue to grow because as the war goes on, it continues to destroy infrastructure. And the destruction of infrastructure is what makes humanitarian aid necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffiths. Mohammed Arslan, Anadolu Ansi, the Turkish news agency.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Alessandro. Thank you, sir, Mr. Griffiths, for the brief. My question is there a possibility? Yeah, is there a possibility for peace negotiation to stop ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine this year, or are you making your aid plans anticipating that this war will continue this year also? Thank you so much.
Yeah, maybe I'm lucky. I have nothing to do with political diplomacy and the achievement of peace, because it doesn't. The global record these days is pretty grim, isn't it? So I've got the easy one, which is humanitarian aid. We always plan humanitarian aid across the world without supposition that the war will end and release us from our obligations. Each plan that we put forward, like this one today, is for the whole year. If suddenly tomorrow a miracle happened and the war stopped, we would be the happiest of people, right after Ukrainian people. And of course, we would redirect funding towards reconstruction and repair and so forth. There will continue to be significant financial needs, even in the aftermath of war. And we know this from everywhere we've worked. The cost of reconstruction, of making homes safe, of demining, especially demining agricultural areas, of the repair of the Kakoba Dam, which has still not been repaired, which was impacted, remember, last July, I think it was. There will always be costs, but this plan is based on the pessimistic assumption that the war will continue through 2024.
Lisa Schlein, Voice of America.
Thank you, Alessandra, and good morning. Good morning to you. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. One is you just said that the needs will rise as the war goes on, true. And so I'd like your reaction to the fact that support appears to be waning for Ukraine from the United States, from European countries, and what your concerns are about that in terms of the continuance of the war and the acceleration of the damage and the needs that will be growing. And are you concerned that if Russia does indeed gobble up Ukraine, that its appetite to go after other countries will accelerate as well, and this will create more work for you and other humanitarian agencies? And then secondly, is there any, do you have any sort of interaction with the Russian government? And what do you know about the people the Ukrainians who are living in the Russian occupied territories? Apparently, you're not able to get to any of them. What are your concerns about that? Thank you.
Well, I think I answered the second question already. I think it was the first question I was asked. It's about access to these people and how aid is delivered has been at a very low level by local organizations throughout. And our own access has been impossible for reasons of safety and security. And we have not been able to do it. We've made many representations. We've had many discussions with Russian authorities about it, and we have not yet succeeded in coming to an agreement as to how we can deliver aid responsibly according to our usual norms to those people directly. It can be done through cash, of course. Cash is, one of the ways in which, and particularly last year, we saw a huge increase in cash globally as a way of delivering aid, and cash crosses lines, through the internet. In 2023, cash assistance reached 4 million people in Ukraine, with $580 million dispersed through cash. The by far largest amount, of course, in areas under Ukrainian control, because there are complications providing cash into those Russian-held areas to do with banking and so forth. But cash is a means of getting aid to people who need it in places like that. The first question, well, I'm not going to get into the business of Russia gobbling up any countries. Again, that's not my business. I'm focused on aid where it is needed now. The truth of the matter is, firstly, sorry.
Can you turn off Mr. Aslan mic, please?
Firstly, we do have a very close and honest and open and constructive relationship with the government. That helps us a great deal in terms of our operations. We complement their work. And as Filippo said about the regional response, it is also true about the in-country response. Many of the people are reached by people who are not part of the response plan, European aid directly and others. And we have as yet seen no diminution of humanitarian aid for those people, nor indeed from the United States as yet. No diminution of humanitarian aid. There may be diminution in other aspects of aid to Ukraine, but for us, for now, and we beg for today, please don't walk away from Ukraine. The people of Ukraine need us today as much as they did on the 22nd of February, 2 years ago. Thank you.
Can I take a last question?
Sure.
Okay, let me take a last question. I think it's from Gab. You had a question, Christophe? No. Okay, so Gabriel from Reuters have a follow-up.
Thank you for taking my second question. Given that the appeal last year was funded at 67%, as you mentioned, and obviously we have a lot of competing crises, as you mentioned as well. How do you think donors will respond to this appeal this year, given all these crises? What level of funding would you deem acceptable or deem workable in these circumstances for Ukraine? Thank you.
100% funded. What are you going to ask me, right? I mean, we wouldn't put a plan out if we didn't want it funded at 100%. We have already reduced the numbers of those we seek to reach to 8.5 million from whatever it is, 14.6 million. So we've already reduced those to the priority needs. And every single plan that we put out is very, very strictly prioritized. You will see that as we go through 2024, where we have reduced, as I said earlier, the overall ask from 58 billion down to 48. And we do that in order to make sure that we want all of it. There are no parts of this which are sort of an add-on, nice to have, optional extra. This is all about, in Ukraine, life-saving assistance. And we hope that governments will continue to be generous. Of course, you're right, and the burden of your question is that the competition for funding is getting greater. There's no question about it. And as we go into 2024, the competition for funding is going to be more difficult than 2023, even. The costs of the Gaza war, even before it extends any further, are considerable. But also, you remember that country that we never talk about? Sudan, which has probably the greatest suffering that you see in many senses around the world today, and which is down around 37% funded, I think, but which is so hard to get onto the screens and to the attention of people, precisely because of the competition of places like Gaza now and Ukraine as it was. Getting attention, your attention, and I'm not blaming the press, this is a factor of world interest, to these countries makes all the difference. And Sudan is one where I feel the greatest conscience and failure of ours to deliver to the people there. The UN operation is not in Khartoum. It's also been now part of many attacks in Wadi Medina, which is the jump-off point for Khartoum. MSF, as usual, courageous to an extraordinary degree, still gets in and out of Khartoum. ICRC, the same. But Sudan, well, that's a whole nother story for another day. Please, Ukraine today, only asking for a little bit, $3.1 billion, please, by tea time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, USG Griffiths, and good luck with the official launch of the plan in a moment. Thank you, everyone who has participated in this press conference. I wish you a very good week. Thank you.
Let's hope so, and perhaps not such an early one.
No, next time.
No.